Watching TV on a TV. So what I just showed was the opening minute and quarter of a series called Tokusatsu Gagaga, which is itself an adaptation of a manga about an enthusiastic fan of Tokusatsu, which, as you saw, is a genre of special effects programs, typically involving science fiction superheroes, giant monsters, giant robots. And this panel is here to cover a lot of the gist of it and sort of introduce people to just what a lot of it is. So as you can see, it covers a wide range from giant monsters, giant heroes, color-coded spandex-wearing heroes, robots, cyborgs, aliens, what have you. And if you look close enough, you can probably recognize a few of them yourself, because this is a legacy that began as far back as the 1950s, thanks to a single movie, and then just exploded into a whole genre of entertainment that has lasted well into today. And I'm here to cover a few examples of it. But as an example, can anyone identify anybody in this picture?
Just like anyone?
Yeah, just general.
Ultra 7.
Godzilla.
Red Baron.
Johnny Sokon is giant robot.
There you go.
Mirror Man, Red Baron. Oh yeah, Kamen Rider, Sentai, Sun Vulcan, Kikaider, Zubat.
Jetman in there.
Yep. Bottom right, you'll see Jetman. Bottom left, you'll see Sun Vulcan.
Dynaman, Scheider, or is it Shiro? I forget which one's the blue one.
That's Scheider, I believe.
Okay. Bioman.
So as I mentioned, it is an entertainment genre that emphasizes application of special effects. The medium has been used for everything from fantasy, drama, science fiction, and far more as the years went on, and many more creators, be they screenwriters and directors and designers, have just been given as much creative reign as they reasonably can to do what they will with the genre, which makes it so vibrant and distinct for Japanese entertainment. The origins, I didn't get to complete this slide, actually do have something owing to some Japanese culture, namely in two forms. Burdaku puppetry typically involves what are some very elaborate puppets that are often operated by puppeteers who you're meant to, for the sake of immersion, not acknowledge their presence as they perform and articulate the movements from arms, legs, even the face and expressions. Kabuki theater in particular was an art form that really flourished after the Civil War or Warring State period of Japan that was exaggerated performance that were either based on factual history or fiction and had certain staging and theatrical tropes. For example, an aesthetic you will probably see in some of the footage that I will eventually present, you will often see, depending on staging, you will often see the villain on the left and the hero on the right of frame. This was how it was established in Kabuki theater, so as to establish who the audience is meant to assume to be the protagonist and the antagonist. Another trope that that would have just as much been associated with Kabuki and onward with period films called jidaigeki in Japan is the yelling or the calling of special techniques so as to give a certain flair, dramatic flair and creativity in actual martial arts applied thanks to the martial history of Japan. So for this slide, I just thought to just have a bit of fun. Can anyone tell me who they are? Who do you think these men are, and what are they doing?
Those are the three guys that have been in the Godzilla costume.
Nakajima. I'm trying to think, because he was Shishi Ranger's suit actor.
Yes. The one in the middle is the original and longest running suit actor for Godzilla, Nakajima Haruo, who we only lost about no less than 2 years ago. But he is the original Godzilla. On his left is Kitagawa Tsutomu, who has been a suit actor not just for Godzilla, but before that he did a lot of Super Sentai, which is the source material that is adapted in the West as Power Rangers. And on the right was the more immediate successor of Nakajima, as Kitagawa actually began the Millennium era of Godzilla. And each of them had very distinct ways of movement, so as to stand out from each other, and depending on the actual motif and the idea behind what they wanted Godzilla to be, depending on the movie. So we begin with kaiju, or giant monsters. The actual word takes from two characters of kanji, which literally means strange beast. But it began with Gojira, which itself is a portmanteau of two animal names in Japanese. Gorilla and Kujira, which is the native word for whale, hence Gojira. It initially symbolized the destructive power of nuclear weapons, as Godzilla was literally this giant walking force of nature. But as he became iconic and continued to appear in future movies, be him the enemy or fighting other kaiju, he changed from being a lawful guardian of Earth, a chaotic neutral force, or simply an evil monster, as was seen fit for every movie. And it all depends. For example, I recall that the Netflix Godzilla series treated him as an invader, and this was one of the first times that they treated the story as being one of where mankind has absolutely zero chance to beat him, so they leave Earth. They wander countlessly throughout the galaxy before eventually finding their way back to what turns out to be Earth. On top of that, they also have to deal with something that they thought they could use as an anti-Godzilla weapon, just becomes another Godzilla, their take on Mecha Godzilla. Suffice to say, there's been multiple Godzilla adaptations, and it all just depends on which era you appreciate, be it the Showa generation, the Heisei generation, the Millennial generation, or even our most recent one here in the States back in 2014, which is set to do battle with King Kong in a few years from now.
Next year.
Oh, yeah.
But what about the 1999 movie?
1998?
98?
That's a lot of
We don't talk about that
With the exception of the Roland Emmerich Zilla. No one really likes talking about Zilla.
We don't discuss the Blight Company?
Hey, it produced a great TV series though.
Yes, granted. Henshin heroes. Henshin literally comes from the kanji for change body or transform. Transforming heroes who would typically fight an army of evil or a force bent on some evil agenda, like taking over the world, enslaving humanity, or doing whatever they wish. Although not the original transforming hero, Ishinomori Shotaro's Kamen Ranger is most famous for really pushing the genre forward. The one series that tried to get it out first was called 8-Man, but was not immediately successful. So sometimes being the forerunner doesn't mean you're immediately successful. And just for an example of just how OG Kamen Rider was just so different from what we know today, I'm going to show a quick clip.
我らを狙う黒い影世界の平和を守るため Go, go, let's go 輝くマシンライダーライダー仮面ライダー仮面ライダーライダーライダー
Spider-Man! Even though he's not that Spider-Man.
And fun fact, the first two villains the Kamen Rider fights happen to be a Spider-Man and a Batman. Shows how American comics had some amount of presence or influence.
Also reminds me a lot of like those old Western movies. Like,
Bubbles!
So, Kamen Rider in the original series was a brilliant athletic physicist who was abducted by a clandestine organization who take him in to convert him into a cyborg soldier for their own means. The only thing they forgot to do was brainwash him first before modifying him, because as it turns out, one of his benefactors, who was an unwilling member of the organization, springs him out only to be murdered, and leaving the main character to have to fight this entire army of evil and all of these abominable cyborg abominations and monsters, while struggling with the fact that he is no longer essentially human. Now that in pretty much his entire body has been converted to be cybernetic, he only appears human on the outside, but this unreal power makes him something that, while he can be a hero, he is also an outcast. Something that was an established trope of Ishinomori's own brand of heroes. Something that can be very relatable to a lot of Marvel superheroes, and maybe other superheroes of a similar light who were, in some way, can no longer really be considered fully human, or just different from others. And that takes its cues, as it would be later influenced for future ideas, as 4 years after the original Kamen Rider was created, came as a sibling series that many are more familiar for its Western adaptation. Super Sentai began as an idea of, what if instead of just a single hero, what if we had a team of heroes, and to distinguish them, we just have them wear color-coded costumes and let's have a girl on the team whenever possible. And that's how we eventually came up with Super Sentai. And so I'll just show a quick scene from the original series. He meets Sentai, or Secret Squadron Go Ranger.
Actually, I get a question while you're waiting for that to load. So Ishinomori hated capes. That's why he gave him scarves. So why did he give the Sentai ring characters capes? Was it just to distinguish them?
I think it was mostly distinguishing, especially since he wasn't too particular about the color. It was just more the idea that they pushed him to try and create something, to create more out of it. But the fun fact is, even though he was responsible for creating the first and second series, he quit after the second series because Jakkar Dengekitai, or Jakkar, J-A-K-Q, as in Jack Ace King Queen, using a card theme, did not perform as well at the time. And he was personally disappointed with it enough that he decided to just go back to focus completely on Kamen Rider. Which is why he only dabbled in its creation for the first two series, but he's not really fully affiliated with it going forward.
貴様たちは何者だ。赤レンジャー、青レンジャー、金じゃ、
桃レンジャー、
緑レンジャー、これに揃ってオレンジャー、オレンジャー、レッドフィールド、気をつけて困るランパーなんじゃい。それは簡単、トランプだ。トランプか、なるほど。よーし、おっつーいやアジトイヤ伊賀三道黄金仮面こじゃくら果てでも俺たちは秘密オレンジャーもうオレンジャーストーンだ。オッケーこの命
これはジャストン行くわよミドン
オッケーキー赤でいない青よし赤おじゃあフェイスが
Now, a fun fact about Sentai is it didn't really become super until the third series, where, interestingly enough, Toei, the studio responsible for Kamen Ranger and Sentai, wound up doing a collaborative partnership with Marvel Comics, especially with great support from Stan Lee, which is how we famously got a Japanese Tokusatsu Spider-Man series, which is famous for also featuring the first giant robot, which you wouldn't associate with Spider-Man, but the partnership was basically each of them telling the other, here's some of our material, do what you will with it. And so someone at Toei thought, let's not just make him a bike-riding, transforming hero who shoots webs. Let's let him have a giant robot. The giant robot was also famous for being a very much a work in progress that also famously was either went missing or stolen, which is why whatever stock footage they had already filmed of the robot in action was all they could use for the entire run of the series, which is why the robot is famously undefeated in its entire run, unlike a lot of future series that typically you would have the hero you'd have a few moments where they lose, or there would be those stakes where they don't stand a chance. But Spider-Man prevailed purely out of circumstance. It's the one series that unfortunately has not been too easily available because the license fee is probably exorbitantly high, and although Toei has also confirmed that they have a vested interest in eventually allowing this to appear in whatever happens after Into the Spider-Verse, which would be wonderful.
Well, there's also been some licensing issues between Marvel and Toei because Marvel put it on their own YouTube page and then Toei took it down, forced them to take it down.
That was also what I would have mentioned. For the longest time, it was available for free viewing, but there clearly not enough people were in agreement over how to get this done. So my only hope is sooner or later we get to appreciate the oddball nature of this, which is why, again, Sentai, from the third series on, Battle Fever J, they would incorporate the idea of giant robot fights with other giant robots, or in the case of giant monsters of the week, who would then grow to enormous size in order to actually be considered a serious threat. And then there would be the typical situation of win or lose, depending on whatever they deemed fit. So for another example of a scene, I will show from the fourth Sentai series, Denjiman. Another thing that would improve over time was that Sentai Mecha initially started with Battle Fever. The robot was already pre-assembled by default. But as the series went on, Denjiman, as it wasn't shown exactly, that it was a transforming mecha. It was a fighter craft that had a complicated sequence that became a robot. Future robots would consist of separate components that could form a robot, but there weren't for individual team members until 1987's Light Force Mask Man. But from then on, it would always be one mech for every ranger. In terms of influence, Tokusatsu has had a tremendous influence going forward for a lot of manga and anime, and just the medium in general. The genre would have a lasting impact to the point that they would pay homage or reference in their own way, shapes, and forms. For example, show of hands, who here before seeing the movie have read Ready Player One? For anyone who has read the novel, you would know that originally one of the characters there has their avatar assume the form of Ultraman in the final climactic battle. However, due to an ongoing legal dispute over international distribution rights between Tsuburaya and a distribution company in Thailand of all places over the rights, Warner wasn't exactly allowed or able to really get the rights to feature Ultraman, so as a compensation, they replaced it with the RX-72 Gundam from the original Gundam series. Overseas, however, a number of countries, such as the UK, Denmark, and South Korea, would produce their own giant monster films not long after Godzilla debuted. Interestingly enough, all three of these movies have been riffed by our own local Minnesota humor of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Denmark had Reptilicus, and South Korea had Yonkari, both of which are available in the new Netflix Season 11 revival of the series. And the UK series, I forget the name right now, but I remember that was in one of the last seasons of the show when it was on the Sci-Fi Channel. And of course, for adaptation purposes, what you may be more familiar with was that Power Rangers has continued to thrive as a foreign adaptation of a Super Sentai franchise, thanks to the adaptation of 1992's Kyoryu Sentai Zyuranger, which of course was dinosaurs, because that dinosaurs always sells great with kids. This was actually something that it was actually a blessing that they went with this, because Haim Saban, who was pushing to try and adapt Sentai here in the States, had been trying since 1981's Bioman. But the series was still very heavily based on sci-fi, and there wasn't enough to really make it stand out, and people over there were thinking, nobody's going to want to watch this stuff. But he just kept pushing for it, and as luck would have it, he eventually went with this, and went at it for some time up until Power Rangers in Space, which adapted Mega Ranger. Then the ownership eventually shifted hands to Disney, which eventually shifted back to him, and now has shifted over to Hasbro, even though, as a weird change of pace, ever since we got to the anniversary, we ended up with a weird situation where we're not directly keeping up with what Japan has been releasing. So we're actually behind on a few Sentai series as we speak, but as of 2015, Shout Factory, who I should mention, are an incredible service for releasing a lot of entertainment on home video, have since gotten the license to release Power Rangers, but also Super Sentai, and have been going forward, having gone as far as Hurricaneger and Aba Ranger. And now have actually been going backwards to 1991's Chojin Sentai Jetman, which itself is an homage to Gatchaman, and almost could have been the first season of Mighty Morphin. And are now going back further. With any luck, if this keeps going well enough, I would like for them to go back as far as the original series, because this is the most exposure we've gotten. Compare that to, say, Kamen Rider, which was only ever adapted twice. First by Saban as Masked Rider, which, with the whole angle he went with that, by turning it into sort of a weird family sitcom about an alien who interacts with a human family of mixed diversity that was trying to be progressive for its time, it just failed. It just failed, which is a shame, because it was enough for Toei to be shy enough to not want to do this again until 2009, when the Wang brothers decided to make their own attempt at Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, which is a literal translation of the 2002 series Kamen Rider Ryuki, which I can best describe as Kamen Rider meets Highlander and Madoka Magica, where all these different riders fight for their own stake to be granted a single wish, although that was, I believe a lot of that was changed for Dragon Knight.
Yeah.
And as of now, there are a few other franchises that also don't get enough coverage here because they haven't really been given enough publicity. But another franchise I mentioned from Toei that is now essentially dormant or inactive is Metal Heroes, which is a transforming hero in and of itself, but is not to be confused with Kamen Rider and Sentai, because these are solitary heroes who use high-tech suits to fight evil, but they don't use giant robots. And they're typically fighting all manner of different enemies. And it's worth knowing that another fun thing about Metal Heroes is it helped influence the design of a famous 80s action hero, RoboCop, because these suits typically were made to look high-tech, super futuristic high-tech, at least what designs in the 80s thought looked super high-tech. So I'll show the brief sequence from the original Metal Heroes. Space Sheriff Gavan.
宇宙刑事ギャバン、コンバットスーツを乗着するタイムはわずか 0.05 秒に過ぎない。では乗着プロセスをもう一度見てみよう。乗着。 返すな。貴様がハンターキラーか。卑怯者。地球は間もなく我々魔空のものとなるんだ。かかれ。
You may have recognized the actor who plays Gavan, as he was previously, at least, in fact, two different Rangers. He was Battle Kenya, Battle Fever J, and Denji Blue, Denji Sentai Denjiman. His name is Owa Kenji, and he has an incredible distinction for being an actor who has appeared in all three of Toei's Tokusatsu IPs, 2 Super Sentai series, at least a few Metal Hero series, and a supporting role in a Kamen Rider movie, while not actually being a writer in that one. So some other noteworthy names, as I'll mention, Nakajima Haruo, who was the first and original longest-running suit actor for Godzilla, Fujioka Hiroshi, who was the first Kamen Rider, and you may know him mimetically for being Sekata Sanshiro, the human spokesperson for the Sega Saturn. Next is a name you won't recognize unless you read the kanji or if you just follow the series for the longest time, but Nibori Kazuo was a suit actor who had the distinction of being the longest running Red Ranger from 1975 with Go Ranger up until Jetman 1991, which would be his final suit acting role. In fact, for Kyoryu Sentai Z-Ranger, which we know as Mighty Morphin, he was the action director for that series. And although he did have at least one exception, he is otherwise known for being the longest-running Red Ranger suit actor. Another name worth knowing is Takaiwa Seiji, who has a similar distinction for being the suit actor for nearly every main rider in a Kamen Ranger series since the Heisei generation began in 2000, with 2 exceptions, which he then eventually compensated thanks to the first 10th anniversary series, Kamen Rider Decade, who had the power to change into other riders previously, which gave him the opportunity to be the 2 riders he didn't get to be, because he was shifting back and forth between Sentai and Rider where necessary. And then, of course, some other names worth knowing would include the likes of Sato Takeru, who was the star of Kamen Rider Denmo from 2007, who after the series became a successful TV and film star, for example, being in the live-action Rurouni Kenshin movies. It's also worth knowing, unlike here in the States where Power Rangers has not been taken too seriously as a milestone in someone's career, over in Japan it's treated very seriously because it's a long-running legacy series and has been an entryway for a lot of young talent. Many start out as writers and then continue on to very successful careers in film and television.
Except for RPM.
With an exception.
I think that's a lot because in the US it's a non-union show too. In Hollywood.
The Yellow Rangers made their own iZombie, and the Red Ranger was the main assistant in Jessica Jones.
And go figure, it's one of the worst Power Ranger series ever.
You bite your tongue.
But again, it just shows how much of a legacy it has and just how much of a great reputation and illustrious it is for a lot of people back in the day because, again, this has been a long-running thing, it's a part of their culture, and it's had its fans, both young and old. It's lasted long enough that most people can appreciate it for everything that it is. We're at a weird point for some of these franchises. Super Sentai, for example, has been met with with low ratings and potentially mediocre to subpar toy sales, which is why the current airing 44th Sentai series, Kishiryu or Dino Knight Sentai Ryu Soldier, is at risk of potentially being the last Sentai series only because Toei may be losing confidence in the brand and may either put it on hiatus or on ice indefinitely, depending.
I expect they'll bring it back to the 50th anniversary no matter what.
Though odds are, yeah, undoubtedly they will try to do something special because this wouldn't be the first time one of their franchises has had to be dormant. Kamen Rider went through the same phase where after 1989, Black RX was the last Showa Rider series to air then because it also saw to the transition of the Heisei period. And in between the 90s, there were only Rider movies, 3 of them, which still had creator Ishinomori Shotaro's input before he passed away in 1998, which is why the Heisei generation of Rider technically didn't begin until 2000, a good 3 years after the fact the era technically began chronologically, and after the fact the franchise was being created without Ishinomori at the helm. And Rider had only a few years back in 2015 and 16, celebrated its 45th anniversary with, among other things, a movie that starred the original Rider, but it's very much a one-off and easily skippable, but still great to see because they brought back Fujioka for the role, and he had some input in writing it. And then a mini-series, a web series that is not meant to be really associated with the main timeline because of its mature, gritty nature, but Kamen Rider Amazons, otherwise known as Amazon Riders on Amazon Prime, is available for viewing and is currently the only Kamen Rider we really have to view here legitimately, albeit by streaming.
Unless you can track down Media Blaster's Kamen Rider the first movie.
And then there were also some film adaptations that had a limited run, and there was a group that did subtitle and release Kamen Rider V3, the second Rider series in history, but its price tag is still pretty steep for a lot of people. For recommendations, for the more legit ways to be able to enjoy these, Shop Factory's official website does stream all of their series for free, though I would still say please consider buying any series that catches your interest. It would be sending them a message. You can use Toku through Amazon for streaming the majority of Ultraman series, including Gridman, the original series, which later got adapted last year as an anime, 4S Gridman, as an offshoot. And as I mentioned before, Amazon Writers on Amazon Prime. Otherwise, just find the series as you will and make what you will of it. My way of supporting has always been, apart from watching, it's also importing a lot of these because these high-end toys are miles ahead of what a lot of us had back in the day, and the fact that these are popular collector's items is just one way to really be able to show support.
There's also Discotech bringing out Just Beyond.
Yes, Discotech releasing a Metal Hero series is also another first, which would be a nice change of pace just to have some variety. So now that I have some free time on my hands, since I think I covered most of this, I'm going to open the floor for any questions or comments.
Isn't Metal Heroes what they adapted into VR Troopers?
Yes.
They tried to squish 3 series together?
Several. They mishmashed and it just didn't work. Big Bad Beetleborgs was also one, but that also didn't work.
You keep talking about the Heisei and Showa eras. How are those determined?
All right, so I did have to mention another specific thing. Japan also uses their own unique calendar system, which is based on the reigning emperor, who at this point is only a figurehead, but is still a symbolic figure of the state. And for the longest time, they've used this as part of their calendar system while also adapting the Gregorian calendar when they modernized. But the Showa era refers to the era of that began from 1925 on to 1981. And from there, after post-January 81, up until April 30th of this year, will have been the entire Heisei period. In fact...
You mean 89? You said 81.
Yeah, 81. 89. That's right, sorry. Yeah, technically, yes. The Showa era ended in mid-January of 1989 after Emperor Hirohito, who the emperors in Japan are always referred to by their title, not their name. It's considered taboo to use their name, especially. But the Showa emperor passed away January 89, leading to the succession of his son, the current emperor, who became the Heisei emperor. And his era will end when he abdicates April 30th of this year. In fact, as of today, I've yet to check, but as of what should be April 1st in Japan, the imperial household will have announced the official name of the new era. I've just not had a chance to confirm yet because it's supposed to be a big deal. It's a tight-knit secret, about as much of a secret as the Vatican determining when who they've chosen for the Pope. It's that big of a deal. So, for a fact, you can now say, depending on what year you were born, you've lived through certain eras. So, anyone born after 1989 will have been born in the Heisei generation. Anyone born before 89 will have been in the Showa generation. So, show of hands, who was born before 1989? All right, after 89. So most of you were born in the Heisei period. And a fun way to determine what year, you just take the year and subtract that to the year the era technically began, and it'll tell you what year of Heisei you were born. Another way they only use the actual era for official documentations, or you see it on currency, coin, banknotes, the year it was printed or minted. But I'm curious to know, because obviously Kamen Ranger is also in the midst of its 20th series in this current generation, GO, which is the second decade anniversary of the franchise, and to be ending that because whatever comes next, who knows? No idea, at least until they trademark the official title and leave us to speculation before giving us publicity photos and PR over what it's going to be. And we usually don't know that until a few months into summer. And usually anniversary series are not easy to start because it takes a bit of familiarity with the previous series to really appreciate. So mileage may vary, and it depends on just how much you're willing to sit through a lot of what actually happens. I've put up with a lot of what's been going on when I started, because I actually started with 2013's Kamen Rider Gaim, went backwards here and there and just cherry-picked what piqued my interest, and it just kept going from there to eventually complete what all has been available. So I will admit, while there are some that I haven't yet touched and some that only kept me going for so long, I've stuck with it just because I found the genre to really appeal to me on so many levels, especially the idea of heroes fighting for a good cause, fighting for personal beliefs. The Showa generation was about heroes who, they were banded together for a purpose because they're fighting for the greater good.
For the greater good.
The Heisei generation heroes had a bit more flair and personality, which is why from the Heisei period onward, it became a thing where a lot of Sentai, for example, were less young, were eventually teenagers, not so much young adults, and there was more character chemistry to give individuality to realize, hey, we're here together, but we still don't really know each other. We gotta get along, we gotta get to know each other, we gotta figure out how do we make this work, how do we win? Which was not something that was too easily incorporated back then, just because it was about, hey, you all gotta be a team, we all gotta work together, let's do this. So there was never too much concern about rocking the boat or changing the dynamics until they decided to really flesh out individual characters.
And that's why Guy Yuki is such a beloved character, because he broke that mold.
Yes. So since I now have a bit of time on my hands, I will just share some footage. As a quick point of reference, if you ever check out the Studio Trigger miniseries Ninja Slayer, the last few shots in the opening were lifted from these last two shots of Jiraiya. about watching some of the Showa to early Heisei series is to see how Tokusatsu relied on so much practical effects before CG could ever really be a thing. You'd have pyrotechnics, you'd have wire work, you'd have acrobatics, you have reverse shots, you have compositing, putting footage over another shot, which is how you have, for example, could have a giant monster in the background while having regular sized people in the foreground. These are all just great examples of filmmaking just at its best, using what was available at the time. Nowadays, a lot of it is so much, I dare say, cheapened by the fact that there's such heavy and easy use of computers to get so much of it done that I just feel like, while it's good that it's there, you just sometimes appreciate a lot of, despite the corniness and cheesiness of the past, you just appreciate a lot of the work that went into how they used to do it before any of this was possible.
Well, I think the worst part about it is, yes, because back then you will get some shots that have not aged well, but then sometimes the CGI shots look either just as bad or sometimes worse. Because like Kamen Ranger has some shots that are just like, that looks bad. Because Flashman has some bad chroma key shots in it, but yes. The Kamen Ranger's like, you're just as bad as Flashman, and that was 15 years prior.
Yes.
Well, let's be honest. The effects aren't good unless someone actually risks burning to death for it.
Well, like, one of my favorite scenes for fire effects is Kamen Ranger, when Sasuke has the sword that's on fire, and he's just twirling it around.
I think mine is in the movie Inglourious Bastards. They actually burned that set down. They had one take.
Yes.
And now, just to show as an example of how far we've gone today, I will try and show some footage from the currently airing Sentai series.
So.
I have the right one. I hope I do.
Which scene are you looking for?
Yeah, the first episode I was going to show.
Oh, the Sky fight in episode 2?
Yeah.
Darn, my computer's in the car. He must be really cold in there. The suit actor must be like, I can move!
just how much progress has gone from big blocky designs to so streamlined angular forms that can be pretty light for this kind of movement.
Although I want to stick Lego blocks on him.
お前たちのニューソウル、神殿の力はなくなってもパワーは失ってはおらぬ。
マスターのソウルがここに。これからは俺たちが守ります。この地球を。
その昔に行くぞ。
楽勝楽勝。
この村を出ていった仲間がいる。彼らと力を合わせマスターたちの意志を継ぐのだ。
Detour!